Hi there! How'd I get in here? Oh, don't worry about that. I'm sure Tori will be fine with it. I don't think I need to tell you that chapters 3 and 4 have completely disrupted the theory scene. We have so much more information now, and even things that we thought were set in stone have turned out to not be as accurate as we once believed. With all that being said, what about my predictions I shared before the chapters released? How have they fared? Today, I want to go over everything I said in my predictions video, as well as all the additional predictions I left in the pinned comment on that video, and discuss what I got right, what I got wrong, and just generally talk a bit about where I currently stand with the ideas that I previously shared. Before we begin, I just want to say thank you so much for the support on the original video. I never thought that a video of mine would get over 100,000 views, and I'm incredibly grateful to everyone who took the time to watch it, to leave a comment, and to subscribe to the channel. We're already at over 2,000 subscribers, which is just so awesome. Now, let's get to the discussion. Before we get into the predictions that are a bit more nuanced, I want to go over ones which have a pretty clear yes or no answer. I'll be going point by point and giving my thoughts on each. First up, the TV being plugged in between Chapter 1 and Chapter 2 shows that Chris was planning to make their Dark Fountain even before going to the cyberworld. This was already pretty undeniable, but it makes a lot more sense now. Before we had to endlessly ponder why this was the case. Is Chris in a time loop? Is Chris the Knight? But now we know that they're actually part of a whole conspiracy, and this was merely one step in a carefully calculated plan, so no wonder they prepared it in advance. When Ralsei shows up at the beginning of Chapter 3, he'll act confused and nervous because he wasn't expecting this Dark Fountain. Nope. Not only did he not act like this, but turns out Chris's fountain was a part of the prophecy after all. He did kinda act like this in Chapter 4 though, so even if it was for different reasons, I still feel like I won in a way. The phrase darker yet darker likely refers to a dark world within a dark world, and thus likely the depths. Well, as Ralsei so helpfully tells us within 10 minutes of starting Chapter 3, darker yet darker actually just refers to the concept of dark worlds as a whole. It's explained pretty straightforwardly, but it's still possible the phrase could be used in the context of the depths as well. We'll just have to see. Tenna will be the main boss, and Mike will either not appear at all or serve a role aside from boss or secret boss. Yep, though not even I could have predicted just how many Mikes we'd end up actually getting. The Tenna design seen in screenshots is likely a simplified version of his design, like a statue or an award. Yep, I was right about this. That border design in no way prepared us for what he'd actually be like to look at. I'm genuinely convinced that Spamton and Tenna are divorced. Mike is possibly involved as well. Well, this aged like fine wine. Long live Spamtenna Nation. As for the Mike part, that's up to your interpretation. Also, I wasn't the one to come up with this theory. Full credit to TV Land Official and the others who expanded upon it. Toriel will not be a party member. I was right! I was also pretty sure that we wouldn't have any new party members in general, which I was also right about. Interactions between Ralsei and Toriel would be cool to see, but it's also likely that Ralsei will intentionally try to avoid that. Perhaps he'll even put his hat back on to disguise himself. How was I somehow wrong on both fronts? We didn't get interactions between them, but Ralsei didn't intentionally avoid that either. I failed to consider the correct third option, which is Toriel just stuck in a ball the whole time. Which, by the way, I do want to say that while I know some people were disappointed by that, I personally wasn't that bothered, especially because it makes sense narratively. Considering that it's a dark world based on Chris's memories, feelings, and struggles, of course Toriel's role would be simply sleeping, totally unaware of what's going on with them. And not even out of any intentional negligence from her. Chris presumably is the one who made that be her role, just like how in real life, Chris presumably hasn't opened up to her about their various issues. As for Ralsei's hat, we also know now that he probably won't ever put his hat back on, since apparently it got lost forever, which is fine by me. Unpopular opinion, I know, but I've always greatly preferred his hatless design. Plus, that's the appearance he prefers, and that's good enough for me. Which, speaking of which, we'll get some kind of interesting information regarding Ralsei's relation to the Dreamers. We actually did! Not anything crazy, but Ralsei's dialogue about his face shows that he's perfectly aware that he looks similar to Azrael, and implies that he's probably aware of the reason behind that too, even if we aren't yet. The only mentions of Des on the Weird Route are completely optional. With Noelle forgetting more and more, Des might end up forgotten on the Weird Route. Well, this point is null now, as on both routes Tenna mentions her by name, and we get the cutscene of the Holidays and the Dreamers, which features her. I do still think it's possible the quest to find Des might be abandoned on the Weird Route, but I'll discuss that a bit more later. Assuming Chris wants to keep the fact that they're the Fountain's creator a secret, which they probably do, perhaps we could try to tell the others, but Chris will stop us. It does seem like Chris wanted to keep it a secret, but it wasn't as big of a plot point as I had assumed it would be, and we didn't get any chance to do this. We did get something sort of similar to this, though, at the end of Chapter 4. Us making Chris say what's on their mind and them having to close their mouth in order to not give away whatever they were thinking about is a similar concept, so even if this exact scenario didn't happen, the general idea still kinda did. My top candidate for Chapter 3's secret boss is the remote control. Nope. The no blank, no crystal comment refers to the Shadow Mantle and is referring to the Chapter 3 secret boss. I knew it! You people tried to gaslight me into thinking the amount of spaces had significance and that, oh, it couldn't be Mantle, but I always knew I was right. We might have to skip Chapter 3's secret boss, get the Shadow Mantle later, and then reload with it somehow to beat the boss. Nope. Oh well. At the end of Chapter 3, Chris will be revealed to be the TV Dark World's creator, and Ralsei will freak out because Chris has disrupted his one purpose, which is fulfilling the prophecy. This is when he'll leave the party as foreshadowed by Dragon Blazers, and then later he'll rejoin the team once he realizes we shouldn't be following the prophecy. Wow, almost none of this was right. Not only did this very specific scenario not happen, but we also know now that actually Ralsei didn't want to follow the prophecy this whole time. And also, as mentioned before, it turns out Chris's fountain was part of the prophecy after all. So yeah, this one didn't age very well. The police officer that shows up in Chapter 3 will be Undyne. Yep, although she wasn't as relevant as we had all assumed. The struggle between us and Chris will be very important for the story. Yep. The fact that we're possessing Chris will become more obvious over the course of the story. Yeah, I'd call this pretty freaking obvious. Mayor Holliday's name will be Carol. Yep, just as we thought. Mayor Holliday will be an antagonistic force, at least initially. Also true. However, like I assumed, she most likely isn't evil and will at least be partially redeemed by the end of the story. She just doesn't strike me as the type of character who's unredeemable, but also she's a Toby Fox character, which means you can't even really be pure evil in the first place. The extended Light World segment in Chapter 4 will be exploring Noelle's house. We sure did explore her house, extensively. The Chapter 4 Dark World will be the church. Yep, although that was pretty obvious from everything we saw in the trailer and other material leading up to release. Susie and Chris's color schemes being different in the trailer could be because they're in a dark world within a dark world, but the most likely possibility is that it's just lighting from the stained glass windows. It was in fact just lighting, though we were right to think there was significance to it. The lighting changing is meant to represent the second sanctuary being an altered version of the first, so we were right to think there was a deeper meaning, just not right in what that meaning actually was. The Gouet enemy is not related to Birdley in any way. Yep, it's literally just a regular enemy. The clip of the Gouet enemy was possibly taken from the Weird Route, but more likely it was just some kind of mock-up version of the battle made specifically for promotion. That, or the enemy will have some kind of weird gimmick. Nope, turns out that video was just weird for no reason. I couldn't tell you. I do think monsters bleed in Deltarune, but it's still hard to tell for sure without more evidence. Well, we got more evidence, and by that I mean we literally see Susie bleed very prominently at the end of Chapter 4. And before you say anything about her being half-human, I'd like to point out that Noelle is also implied to bleed in the Weird Route. At this point, I think it's pretty cut and dry that monsters do in fact bleed, and that kid was either just a dumb kid who doesn't know basic biology, or only certain species of monsters bleed. They also turn to dust when they fully die though, so everyone kinda wins. If we get a track in Deltarune just called It's Raining, I will have a heart attack. I may or may not have froze and started tearing up the second I heard the first note of The Place Where It Rained. The Flower King being a dark world is possible and could tie into escapism via comic books, but I personally don't think it's likely since we're already focusing on the Dreamers in Chapter 3. Okay, yeah, I took the craziest L on this one. The cat minigame will be an optional minigame in Castletown that is either unlocked after something involving Friend, or exists as foreshadowing for Friend. They're connected somehow, but Friend will not just be an irrelevant side character who only exists for the minigame. Well, I was basically correct on all fronts here. It was an optional minigame in Castletown, almost certainly exists as foreshadowing for Friend, and Friend is not a side character who exists just for those minigames. Chris does not like what happens on the Weird Route. Boy, I wonder what them kicking the ever-loving crap out of the soul in the bathroom was supposed to convey. The Weird Route will not involve Toriel, Undyne, or anyone else. It is focused specifically on Noelle. I told you all. Sorry, Firegrave people, no offense, I just think your ideas were stupid and missed the point of the route entirely. Things will change because of the inciting incident of Snowgrave, and there may be future requirements to stay on the Weird Route, but regardless, Noelle will remain an integral part of it. Not only is Noelle the main focus of the route, as I've always said, but I was also right about having to do more things to stay on the route even after Snowgrave. W.ogg and D.ogg in the files could possibly be the start of a pattern of audio files spelling out Gaster's name. Unfortunately, no, this theory is dead in the water. Would have been cool though. And that's all the predictions with more clear-cut answers. Now we have to get into the real meat and potatoes, which is everything that isn't as clear-cut. For the sake of coherency, I'll be going in the same order as the original video for this segment. The predictions from my pinned comment will be sorted into the appropriate sections. First off, there is no third entity possessing Chris, it's just us and them. I still firmly believe this, and I feel like it's far more obvious now considering that the dynamic between us and Chris has been specifically highlighted in Chapter 4. With all this new information we've learned about Chris, it'd be even less satisfying to learn that actually it was all done by some other unknown entity, and I just can't see that ever being the intention. Chris had a normal soul before we showed up. Gaster connected us to it, and now we control Chris via their soul. They can't function for an extended period of time without it, so despite what they want, they eventually have to put it back in and let us resume our control. I still believe that this is generally the case. However, it's likely that Chris may have had more involvement in their own possession than we thought, or perhaps Des did, considering the whole "with your heart is my mark" thing. See Andrew Cunningham's video if you don't know what I'm talking about. It's still definitely Gaster who does the actual connecting though, and I still think it's Chris's own soul that we're controlling, rather than some artificial soul that replaced theirs or something. We also now know that Chris needs the soul for some part of their plan, presumably because they can only steal dark fountains with the soul, so that's part of the reason why they always put it back in. But it's still abundantly clear that another part is simply keeping themselves alive. I've been kind of shocked by how many people saw the stuff in Chapter 4 and just immediately jumped to, oh, so Chris can function perfectly fine without the soul. Like, no? When they put us back in after the stuff at Holiday Manor on both routes, when we first start walking around again, they literally stumble and fall over like their body is physically weak. Not only that, but Noelle mentions on the weird route that when Chris talked to her the night after the cyberworld, their voice was weak and shaky. We now know that they can survive without it for a lot longer than we previously thought, and that they're capable of doing more taxing actions like fighting us in the closet or carrying Burley to the hospital, but we've also been given some of the most definitive evidence that they do need it to survive. The time limit is longer than we thought, but it's made pretty clear that going around soulless is physically draining for Chris. Test run theory. Gaster briefly controlled Chris as a test run for when we're connected, which explains the birdcage and the bloodstain. So this is one that I actually made a whole video about. Unfortunately, while I still think it's possible, I think we've gotten a better explanation. Which is fine, because the whole preface of that video is that it might not mean anything and it was just an idea that I wanted to put out there, not necessarily what I literally think happened. Anyways, considering that the soul is part of the plan Chris is helping carry out, that pretty much explains it. Why did Chris already know how to pull out their soul? Why did they have the birdcage prepared in advance? Because this was part of the plan. They knew they were going to be possessed ahead of time. At least that's what we can assume. The bloodstain is interesting though, as that does still imply that they've actually ripped their soul out proper before. If it was always their soul, then they could have actually done a test run on themselves, ripping their soul out while still in control of it, just to make sure they'd be able to when we're controlling it. That or the stain really is from something else, possibly self-harm. Either way, I think this mystery's basically been solved at this point. Chris is able to do some things while we're controlling them. They don't take the soul out just to act on their own, but primarily to hide what they're doing from us. I was right on the money with this one. Not only do we get a ton more instances of Chris acting on their own while we're controlling them, but Chris takes the soul out in order to hide the rest of the shelter code from us, to have their phone call, to help Burley and go to Noelle's house on the weird route. It's been made very clear that Chris is intentionally trying to hide what they're doing from us, and that seemingly is the main reason they take the soul out. This even extends to things outside of the plan or weird route cleanup. As we learn in the first sanctuary, Chris actually is physically able to play the piano with the soul inside them. It's not that they can't play with us controlling them, it's that they don't want to. And this makes sense from what Noelle told us in her blog post about them. Chris seemingly doesn't like being watched while playing, so of course they wouldn't want to play while we're watching them. That's why Chris only starts playing again initially when they're completely alone. It's only with Susie's encouragement that they're later able to play in front of the others. Chris summoned us themselves because they feel like they're living their life wrong and that things would be better if someone else just did it for them. While Chris summoning us themselves seems more likely than ever, I think it's far more likely now that it was specifically for the plan they're carrying out. I still think this could have played a part in it though, at least subconsciously. At the very least it feels like intentional subtext, the idea that Chris's life is quote-unquote better now that we're controlling them. Susie's comments about Chris being a school zombie and sleeping like a corpse just refer to us possessing Chris. I still think that this is the case, not much more to say. Chris's connection to water is meant to further tie them to the Dark Worlds. Still think that this is the case. Chris hasn't been on a full Dark World adventure the way we do in game, but they likely went inside the bunker as a kid, which probably is a Dark World of some kind. Well, we now know that the shelter for sure has a Dark World inside of it. I'm less confident now that Chris actually went inside the shelter fully as a kid, but they still definitely interacted with some weird Dark World stuff in some way, so my thoughts on this haven't really changed. Chris is familiar enough with Dark Worlds to be scared of them, as shown by them backing away from one and telling Undyne about their existence. Even though it was likely part of the plan, Chris is definitely still unnerved by the Dark Worlds at first, which, as we previously thought, still likely stems from some childhood encounter. Them telling Undyne, though, was likely just to lure her into the Dark World as part of the plan. Chris ate the pie the previous night, so Toriel would have to make a new one, creating a distraction. They slashed the tires so Susie would stay and Toriel would call the police. They opened the door so that the police would see the Dark World and finally understand that it's real. Everything here was right except for the police thing. They actually opened the door so the police would get lured into the Dark World and get kidnapped by the Knight. Chris already knew how to make a dark fountain because they had gone in the bunker Dark World before. Well, this has a pretty straightforward explanation now. Chris probably just learned how to do it from their good pal the Knight over there. Honestly, this was always a pretty shaky point since I never really elaborated on how exactly going in a Dark World would have led to them knowing how to make one, so I'm fine with this being wrong. Chris's main goal is disrupting the prophecy. Chris wouldn't want to go along with a set-in-stone destiny that's been laid out for them. Chris's dark fountain is not part of the prophecy and was not the one we were supposed to go to next. This one is complicated. To start, we now know that Chris's fountain is a part of the prophecy, so the act of creating it is not Chris defying the prophecy as I initially thought. Where it gets more murky is what Chris's actual feelings on the prophecy are. The problem here is that Chris seems to be working for the Knight somewhat reluctantly, considering the whole "you promised" thing and the fact that they clearly care about their friends despite working against them. So whether the plan Chris is helping with is for or against the prophecy, and whether Chris is for or against the prophecy are two different questions. At the very least, I'm pretty sure that Chris personally wants to try and change the prophecy. Depending on what the final tragedy exactly is, Chris probably wouldn't want it to happen, unless it's something where they get harmed. But the most concrete evidence for this is the dialogue for using a shadow crystal in front of the final prophecy. It says that Chris looks through it and that no matter what, the text of the prophecy does not change. Chris then apparently shakes the crystal, but it still doesn't change. This to me shows that Chris is trying to see if there's any way the prophecy can be changed, which implies that they do want it to change. We still know so little about their exact motivations, so even if it's vague, I think it's safe to assume for now that Chris does want to change the prophecy. Now, as to whether they're actually working to change the prophecy is a different story. This is one of the big questions, and I don't really want to go into a whole deep dive here, especially since I'm not totally sure myself, but I think what seems the most likely to me is that the Night Gang is trying to fulfill the prophecy, which might be why they aren't causing the roaring. It's too early in the story for that. Again, we don't know for sure. Honestly, we really don't know anything about this group's goals or actions or even who exactly is involved, but regardless, that's what makes the most sense to me. Especially since if the heroes are now set on subverting the prophecy, it just makes sense that the antagonists are trying to fulfill it. So overall, I still think Chris does personally want to disrupt the prophecy, but they're currently working to do the opposite. Darkners are able to see the future simply because they know the prophecy. I feel like this is basically confirmed at this point. Like I mentioned in my original video, Sham isn't the only Darkner who's able to predict things. Even someone like Lancer is apparently aware of the prophecy and the fact that he plays a role in it. Since we now know just how important and prevalent the prophecy is, I feel pretty confident in saying that this is true. Chris was intentionally made to be viewed as an antagonistic force by the player, but this is only if we assume that we should be following the prophecy, which we probably shouldn't be. This still applies, though the specifics are a bit different. It's clear now that Chris is not just an antagonist from a naive player's perspective, that is actually the role they're currently taking on. We're on board with subverting the prophecy now, but Chris is still very much opposed to us since, Knight business. And just to make clear, antagonist does not mean villain. Chris is not evil, it just simply means that they're opposing us. Azrael is not dead, and Chris did not kill him. Again, sorry Jaru. Hey, at least Oberon Smog kinda came true. Ralsei is not Azrael, nor a Darkner made from Azrael's dust. This is still definitely true, and I think it's been made even clearer from the continued emphasis on Ralsei being his own person separate from Azrael. Hi, Editing Infozero here. So I'm going to combine 3 different predictions here because I had to rewrite my responses to them, and it ended up just making more sense to just tackle them all at the same time, so yeah. Ralsei is Chris's ideal self / monster Sona, and is either the red horn headband or the green crayon. Chris doesn't really want to be like Ralsei, but thinks that their life would be easier or better if they were. Ralsei is different from other Darkeners since he doesn't turn to stone and can travel between dark worlds somehow. This means he might not even need to come from an object, he could simply be made of pure darkness or something like that. Cammy Boy G's theory about Ralsei being a goner makes a lot of sense, and I wouldn't be surprised if it turned out to be true. Well, I was really attached to the Ralsei is Chris's ideal self theory, and while I still think it's possible for it to be true in some way, I no longer think Ralsei is the red horn headband, or the green crayon, or really any object. Like I said in the original video, I've always considered it possible that Ralsei doesn't need to come from an object at all, and that's part of why I found Cammy Boy G's theory about him actually being a goner very compelling. Originally, I had stated here that I wasn't sure anymore, but I took so long making this video that Cammy Boy G released a follow-up video about Ralsei where he concludes that Ralsei cannot be an object in the light world. I won't rehash everything he says here, go watch his video, it'll be linked in the description, but basically several inconsistencies point to this being the case, and I'm firmly convinced at this point. He also returns to the goner Ralsei idea, which I think is actually still possible, but again, watch his video if you want to know more about that. Chris does not hate Ralsei, but they aren't super close to him considering they just met. Ralsei is also the main enforcer of the prophecy, and is clearly aware of the player but says nothing, which makes Chris uncomfortable. This is why his teal heals them less. Okay, this is sort of a loaded one, so bear with me. I think Chris not hating Ralsei but not being very close with him is basically confirmed at this point. They now show affection for him by themselves, and the T-stats for him go up in the code after hugging him at the end of Chapter 4, which shows that Chris definitely does care for him. But let's not forget that all the evidence for Chris not liking Ralsei all that much before still exists. The most damning of which for me has always been the scene after Spam to Neo if you choose to say that Chris is okay. Ralsei offers his scarf to them, but apparently Chris instead ignores him and asks for Susie's jacket instead, which Ralsei is a bit caught off guard by. This seems like a pretty clear instance of Chris brushing Ralsei off in favor of Susie. I think people have been too black and white about Chris and Ralsei's relationship, especially since the new chapters dropped. The new content we've gotten clearly shows that Chris does like Ralsei and cares about him, but I disagree that it inherently means they've always felt that way. Especially with their T-stat changing in the code, it seems pretty clear to me that Chris was more distant to Ralsei for whatever reason initially, but now they've gotten closer over the course of the adventure. I think that's really sweet, and I wish more people would view it that way rather than trying to say that Chris was always friends with him from the very beginning. With that out of the way though, let's go over these other points. In regards to Ralsei being the main enforcer of the prophecy, we now know that that's just what it looked like on the surface, and actually Ralsei wanted to subvert the prophecy this whole time. Unfortunately, we have no way of knowing if Chris was aware of that before the end of Chapter 4, and we don't even technically know for sure what Chris's thoughts are on the prophecy, so it's unclear if that was a factor or not. As for Ralsei knowing about the player, I still think that that could be a factor, since Chris definitely knows that he knows. The problem is that we still don't know what Ralsei is saying to Chris when we're not around. Is he placating Chris, reminding them that their possession is necessary? Is he plotting with them to get rid of the player? We literally have no way of knowing, but it's definitely something that he doesn't want us to hear. We just don't know, so again, it's unknown if this contributed to Chris's perception of him, for better or worse. Chris does not view Ralsei romantically because he looks like their brother, but we may be able to continue choosing options that further the two's relationship. Both their romantic undertones and their uncomfortable nature are intentional. This is another one that's complicated. In these new chapters, we are able to compliment Ralsei several times and make him blush, most notably by saying that we want to go to the festival with him, which has consistently been treated as a romantic activity. But this isn't too much of an escalation from what we've been able to do before, and it's still nothing explicitly romantic. But as for Chris and Ralsei themselves, I don't think Ralsei looking like Azrael is as much of a factor for Chris as I previously thought. Chris is very insistent about the two's visual differences, both to Susie and to Ralsei himself. However, I still personally think that they're not interested in him like that, or if they are, it's only a recent development. Us pushing them to act so affectionate towards him in Chapter 1 when they just met still can't have been very comfortable for them. Overall, I still think that the romantic undertones are intentional, and I still think that they're supposed to be somewhat uncomfortable, but less in a pseudo-incest way and more in the you are forcing Chris together with someone they just met and they have no say in the matter way. Even if Chris does have feelings for Ralsei, no matter who you try to push them towards, it's still you determining something extremely personal for them that they should be the one deciding on their own terms. Also, I just want to make clear that I never actually saw Ralsei as being pseudo-incest or morally wrong in any way. Even if Ralsei is meant to resemble a dreamer, the narrative made clear even back in Chapter 2 that Ralsei being his own person outside of preconceived notions about him is an important plot point. I never saw Chris and Ralsei being romantically together as inherently wrong in any way. The uncomfortable aspect was always the idea that Chris might not be able to get over the resemblance to Azrael, and that we might be forcing the two together when they don't want that. But as long as Chris was fine with it, I had no problem with the ship, and that's still the attitude I carry now. Please don't harass Ralsei shippers, for the love of God. Deltarune is interested in at least touching on the idea of the player getting to decide who the protagonist's romance is, as shown by Ralsei in the main route and Noelle in the weird route. I still think that this is true, though again, the stuff with Ralsei may not be quite as prominent as I thought. The stuff with Noelle, on the other hand, has only gotten more overt. Ralsei was intentionally created by Toby to be lovable, so that we'll make choices that most strongly show off our love for him. I still think that this is the case, but I think it's deeper than the potential romance thing. Us getting more attached to Ralsei is important for the plot point about him and other Darkners being treated as actual people who matter, and it also makes it more impactful when him hiding stuff from us is revealed. Ralsei has feelings for us, Chris, or both. I think it's probably us because he often means us when he says Chris, and he seems to hold us in higher regard. I still don't know, to be honest. Ralsei definitely cares about Chris, but he's still going along with the player stuff since he's continuing to keep it a secret. I still think it's kind of a mix of both. Honestly, I think Ralsei is just so starved for validation and affection that he doesn't really care whether it's us or Chris who's showing it to him. Ralsei is aware of the distinction between us and Chris, and there's a mutual love between him and players who like him. Ralsei cares about Chris, but ignores their agency sometimes because he holds us in high regard. Again, I do think this is an aspect of the dynamic that exists, but I don't think Ralsei is as specifically fixated on us as I once thought. Just like how he doesn't actually want to fulfill the prophecy. He's definitely aware of our presence, but I honestly don't know at this point if Ralsei genuinely likes us or if he's merely placating us and actually wants to help free Chris from us. Again, it really depends on what he's saying to Chris when we're not around. Either way, he's still not telling Susie about us, which seems sketchy. Ralsei does care about us, but he also might be catering to us so heavily so that we continue playing. If we don't enjoy playing, then we'll just quit the game and doom Deltarune's world. While I'm iffy on whether Ralsei does care about us or not, I still think this idea holds merit either way. We're still the only ones who can seal the fountains, and it's now been directly shown that that power is ours specifically, not Chris's. Chris and the Night Gang apparently need the soul to traverse the Dark Worlds and seal the fountains, Susie mentions the soul after defeating the Titan, etc. So I think Ralsei likely is trying to keep us around by catering to us. I just don't know if that's his only reason. Ralsei is not evil, but he knows more than he lets on, and may play more of an antagonistic role in the future. Yep, it's now been directly addressed that he knows more than he lets on. I still think there will probably be further conflict with him in the future since, again, he still hasn't revealed the player stuff, but I don't think it'll be anything as serious as a fight against him or anything. Ralsei is like a cult survivor. He has lived his life in isolation and believes the things he was taught because they're all he knows. He's going to have to unlearn these harmful ways of thinking and expand his worldview. I still think this is accurate. Just as I predicted, we've continued to see him work on unlearning stuff like Darkners not being their own people and all that. He's made some really great progress, and I hope he continues it. I hope Ralsei continues to find out what being Ralsei like even is. He exists to assist us and see that the prophecy is followed, but he has no idea who he is outside of that. He doesn't have his own theme, just the legend, so it'd be cool if he eventually gains his own unique theme to represent his growth. Ralsei's lack of a real identity has been especially spotlighted in these new chapters, and I still stand by all of this. I'm still holding out for that Ralsei theme. Don't forget, perhaps? The prophecy originated from Gaster. Oh god, another incredibly loaded topic. All I'll say for now is that at the very least, a version of the prophecy definitely originated from Gaster, but I'm now more inclined to believe that the prophecy originated elsewhere, and that Gaster simply created an altered version in order to try and create a new future, like he said. My Deltarune and all that. Ralsei is connected to Gaster in some way, but he isn't directly working together with him. Most likely he just had some kind of encounter with him, one he might not even remember, where he was told the prophecy and then left in Castletown. I still think that this is true. Gaster told Ralsei the prophecy, either directly or indirectly, and then Ralsei was left to wait in Castletown. Ralsei was definitely the one who decided to summarize the prophecy he was told, though, not Gaster. That was likely part of his efforts to subvert the prophecy, and it seems like more of a personal decision rather than something he was told to do. Ralsei could possibly be a shadow crystal holder, since the two we know of so far both knew more than they should after coming into contact with Gaster, which applies to Ralsei as well. We now know that the shadow crystals seem to originate from the Knight, not Gaster, so it seems like crystal holders don't necessarily need to have come into contact with Gaster. That being said, receiving forbidden knowledge could still be a similarity between all of them, even if it didn't come from Gaster directly, though that's assuming Gerson actually spoke to the Knight when it dropped off his shadow crystal, which probably didn't happen. All that being said, while coming into contact with Gaster and receiving forbidden knowledge may no longer be requirements for being a shadow crystal holder, I still think it's possible Ralsei has one, although I don't think it's as likely now. Ralsei's role is to be the enforcer of the prophecy, so if we do end up going against the prophecy, we might eventually have to fight Ralsei. Turns out Ralsei actually wants to go against the prophecy too, so we should be good. Again, I still think there will be further conflict with him in the future, but I definitely don't think we'll be straight up fighting him, at least not on the main route. Susie is either homeless or lives in a bad household. I personally think it's the former. I'm now completely convinced it's actually the latter. We see what is likely her room at the beginning of Chapter 3, and she almost definitely lives in the apartment complex in Hometown due to her comments surrounding it. I don't know how I see her exact living situation, but I do think it's likely that she has a bad history with drunk adults due to her reaction to Toriel being drunk. It's also possible that Susie is a foster kid, but we don't really have enough solid evidence to really say either way. Susie could possibly be from an all-human town. I'm more convinced of this now because of Susie's story about playing the piano. It doesn't necessarily have to be the case, but I could definitely see the thing about her not looking like she should be playing it being because she was the only monster. Magic doesn't exist in the light world. We didn't get a smoking gun for this the way we did with monsters bleeding, but with the continued absence of magic or even the mere acknowledgement of it in the light world, plus good old piss and shit theories still holding up, I still stand by this. I don't think Chris and Susie knew each other before Hometown, but it's possible. I think this is far less likely now, and I never considered it that likely to begin with. Susie saying that they could have been friends ages ago reads pretty clearly to me as saying that they were never friends in the past. In the newest Girl story, Chris likely said something indicating they want Susie to make them disappear, like "I know" or "good." It also could have been a comment pointing out that Susie is projecting, like "you're crying." Yep, my thoughts on this haven't changed at all. The events of the newest Girl story are important and will either be shown or referenced within the game itself. I still think this is the case. Like I explained in the original video, this event seems like a pretty important thing to know about as context for Chris and Susie's relationship prior to the start of the game, so I think it makes sense that it will be at least referenced in-game at some point. Susie is the true protagonist of Deltarune, at least in a narrative sense. I stand by this, but I should have used the term hero rather than protagonist. Chris is the protagonist no matter what, as they're the character we play as, but Susie is the true hero narratively. There will be some kind of conflict between Ralsei and Susie in the future. Well, we got some of that conflict. Like I said in the Ralsei section though, I still don't think we're out of the woods yet, since Ralsei still hasn't told her about the player. Susie will eventually find out that the Dark Worlds aren't real, and that we've been controlling Chris. This will cause conflict as she'll jump to conclusions and think that their friendship was never real. Well, aside from the Dark Worlds not being real thing, which got resolved pretty quickly, all of this still stands. I still think Susie will lash out after finding out about us controlling Chris, but now on top of that, she's also going to find out that Chris has been working with the Knight. So yeah, we're definitely still getting some major conflict with Susie in the future. If we have to fight Susie again, we might get an extended or remixed version of Versus Susie. I still think that this is true, and again, now that Chris's betrayal is in the mix, it's even more likely. Also, we got the return of her regular theme when she confronted Ralsei in Chapter 4, which makes Versus Susie returning even more likely to me. The emphasis on keeping specifically Susie happy may be because she's the one person who's able to go against us in the narrative. We have to keep her satisfied because otherwise she can make everything go off the rails. This is more true than ever before. Susie's ability to change fate has been specifically highlighted in these chapters. It's especially relevant if you think that Susie isn't originally a hero of the prophecy, and or that she's fated to do something terrible. If we're intended to follow the prophecy and Susie is the one person who's able to change it, then it makes sense that we keep being told to try and keep her in check. Noelle is the girl of Deltarune. She takes on many standard attributes of female RPG characters: damsel in distress, love interest, healer, etc. Yep, this hasn't changed. And in fact, the prophecies now specifically mention the second hero known only as the girl, which many think might be Noelle. It's definitely interesting that she's only described as the girl, and even more interesting if you think that the prophecy mentions two different girls. The fact that no one can agree on which one's Susie and which one's Noelle, or if it's even them in the first place, just goes to show how non-specific those roles are. The others are pretty specific to Chris and/or the Vessel and Ralsei, but the girl could be almost anybody. I do wonder if that's intentional commentary on how female characters are often diminished to just their gender and considered interchangeable, but we'll just have to see. Ralsei also falls into these female RPG roles, but he seems to have chosen this role for himself, or at the very least accepts it. Ralsei literally says he took up things like sewing and baking, traditionally feminine hobbies, just to make others happy and not because he particularly likes them, so yeah, this is definitely still accurate. Hi, Editing Infozero here. So I realized that I didn't really explain what I meant by this point very well. Basically what I was trying to say is that Ralsei saying that he does these traditionally feminine things specifically to appeal to, Chris and Susie, but also probably us, it ties back into the whole idea of Ralsei also fitting those female RPG roles of being like a support character and endearing the player by taking care of them. Ralsei has sort of consciously taken on this role of a female RPG character in order to be liked, which again I find very fascinating, so I hope that makes a bit more sense. There's a lot of potential for parallels between Ralsei and Noelle in the future. There isn't really anything new regarding this, but I still think it'd be cool. Berdly will not be a future party member. Still stand by this, especially since we're almost definitely not getting any more party members. Berdly isn't actually in love with Susie. He isn't good at distinguishing the difference between platonic and romantic feelings, so I hope that we get to see him get over his crush and realize this is something he struggles with. This was made even more apparent in Chapter 4. If his wing got damaged in Chapter 2, you can find him in the hospital and talk to him about flowers that Noelle left for him. There's a whole joke about how Berdly can't understand that giving someone flowers could ever be a platonic gesture, further emphasizing that this is something he has trouble with. I'm even more confident now that his crush on Susie is just him misinterpreting what he's feeling, and I really do hope that we get to see that resolved in the future. Gaster is the voice on Twitter, the voice in the Goner Maker, in Chapter 1's UI, in the Game Over screen, etc. Yep, still completely convinced of this. Gaster created Survey Program and Deltarune itself, linking the player to Deltarune's world. Still believe this, and again, to clarify, he made the program that connects us to Deltarune's world, not the world itself. The text-to-speech voice that says Deltarune at the end of each chapter is probably Gaster. Yep, still believe this. The ABC_123_A.ogg message in Undertale asking people not to share secrets could possibly be from Gaster himself as a form of reverse psychology. My thoughts on this haven't changed. Unlikely, but an interesting idea. Entry 17's experiment is related to Dark Worlds, and likely specifically to what Gaster is doing with Deltarune. Yep, still think this is definitely true. Gaster most likely fell into something Dark World related rather than the core. It's also possible that he could have been doing experiments with the core to try and reach the Dark World / the depths. It was for sure Dark World related, but yeah, it probably didn't involve the core. Gaster's shattering could have been an intentional act of suicide. Nothing really new to add here. I still think it's an interesting idea, even if it might not be very likely. Also, when I say suicide here, I don't necessarily mean that his goal was to kill himself, just that whatever led to his shattering was something he intentionally chose to do, even if it meant something potentially happening to him. Our world is lighter than the light world, aka heaven, which is why we're included in Gaster's experiment about multiple layers of darkness. Yeah, this hasn't really changed. Gaster's experiment might not be focused on the layers of darkness aspect, but it's definitely an aspect of it no matter what. Also, Ralsei's explanation for what the Dark Worlds are at the beginning of Chapter 3 makes the whole darkness is fiction, light is reality thing very clear, which only further supports the idea that our world, which is more real than the light world, is likely heaven. Gaster isn't necessarily a bad guy, but someone morally gray who does messed up things in the name of science. It's still hard to tell though. This definitely got further cemented for me with these new chapters. even if his motivations do end up being that he wants to create a better future where everyone's happy, he's still not getting there in the best of ways. We have direct evidence now that he does not give a shit about the Weird Root, considering that he still congratulates you at the end of Chapter 4. Gaster will likely be the character in Deltarune who mirrors the player, like Flowey did in Undertale. I still think that this is likely, considering his whole wants to see what happened shtick, and now the fact that he's seemingly writing prophecy fanfiction. I do also want to mention that Noelle also mirrors the player a lot, since she's the character most associated with video games, and the way that she plays them is very reminiscent of how many players play Deltarune, scouring every inch of them for secrets, doing secret evil routes, trying to break the game, etc. But unlike her, Gaster actually talks to the player directly, similarly to how Flowey seemingly does, so I still think that he's likely the primary one taking on this role. Regardless of his specific intentions, Gaster is likely doing this because he wants to see what happens, just like us. It is an experiment, after all. I'm more convinced of this than ever before, though I want to make it clear that I'm not saying this is his primary goal, but just his overall behavior. I think this is made pretty clear by his reaction to the night fight. He doesn't say anything when we lose initially, suggesting that he doesn't particularly want us to win, but he finds the fact that we want to try again very interesting, and seems to almost cheer us on when we get close. Again, it doesn't seem like Gaster necessarily wants the knight to lose, he's more so just interested in seeing what happens if it does. He feels very much like a neutral party to me, simply observing and wanting to see a different outcome, but not actually belonging to one side or the other. Even if he is working towards a new future, it's in the form of an experiment. He isn't really doing anything himself, just interfering a little bit and then seeing if we can do it ourselves. This is again why I find him interesting as a mirror to the player, because we too aren't really good or evil, but more of a neutral party who just wants to see what happens. Being familiar with Gaster prior to Deltarune will add additional context to his story, but it won't be mandatory to understand it. This is still very true, and I think that this is continuing to be set up. For one, he talks to us a lot more in these chapters, and we also get the dialogue from Gerson about an author getting swallowed up by his story, which obviously parallels Gaster's situation. So I'm still confident that Gaster's appearance in the story will work as a standalone thing. Gaster connected us to Deltarune in order to understand our connection to fiction. He does this via creating a game that never ends, within a world that is not a game. I don't really think that this is the case anymore. I still think it could be a part of it, but I definitely think that his main motive has more to do with the prophecy and everything. The Dark World is meant to function as a game, unlike the Light World, which is not a game but a separate reality, which is why it's devoid of most game mechanics. This is still very true. Noelle makes this even more explicit when talking to Susie in Dessa's room, literally saying that the Dark World was like a game, in a way that emphasizes just how different it was from her actual reality. Also, while on the subject, I still see people constantly bringing up the idea of Undertale-style battles in the Light World, and while I agree it would be kind of cool, I'm really against the idea on principle. The Light World not functioning like a game for the most part is very intentional and helps distinguish the two worlds. If a fight broke out in the Light World, I just can't see it being presented in the Undertale battle format without it completely breaking this distinction. If I had to guess, I think a fight in the Light World would just be presented as a cutscene. I don't want to ruin people's fun, but I think people need to keep in mind what the game is saying with what it gives us. Just because an idea is cool doesn't mean that it would make sense for the story. Toby's reluctance to add save points in the Light World proves that the absence of them was intentional in line with the previous idea. We'll likely save in the Light World in a different way than just the regular Twinkle save point. It did end up being a Twinkle save point, but the narration makes a point about how it's unnatural and shouldn't be there, so I still agree with this. The Knight is working for Gaster, creating infinite Dark Worlds specifically so that the player can explore and seal them. The prophecy's premise of saving the world is just a wild goose chase that isn't ever meant to actually be reached. Well, first off, this likely isn't what the Knight is doing, as they and their allies seem to have a much more direct goal in mind. The prophecy does have weirdness going on, but it's not that it's fake, just that it's a tragic set-in-stone fate. As for the Knight and Gaster, it's complicated. They're definitely still related in some way, holes in hands, but we don't know if they're 100% working together, especially since Gaster doesn't seem to have a problem with you trying to beat them. But again, that's a far more complex topic than I really want to get into today, so I'll leave it there for now. Gaster parallels Gerson quite a bit, which makes sense if we think of Gaster as being the author of the prophecy. I feel so validated about this one. Not only does Gerson have that "some say it swallowed up the author himself" line, which can very easily be compared to Gaster falling into his own creation, but Gerson being the one most adamant about the prophecy being able to be changed could also parallel Gaster if him creating a new future really is about him changing the prophecy. Regardless, these parallels have only become more prominent. The man behind the tree is related to Gaster in some way, but it's not straight up him. He might be a different piece of Gaster or one of his associates like the Secret Bosses. I still honestly have no idea. We got so much more information about the Forgotten Man, and yet it's still incredibly hard to parse. One of the most prominent things we now know is that he's directly related to Chris's trauma in some way, and thus Dessa's disappearance. I like the idea that he's Deltarune's Gaster who got shattered when Undertale Gaster got shattered, and that he was Chris's therapist or something, but the fact that he himself has apparently been forgotten by Chris many times makes me feel like he's more directly involved than just being a therapist. I really don't know. At the very least, I think we can rule out him being an associate of Gaster's, since Gaster considers getting the eggs an issue for whatever reason. While on the topic, I really like the idea that the tree that Chris paints represents mental blockage, creating a metaphorical tree that obscures whatever trauma they're trying to block out, rather than a literal tree that they saw something behind, though that could certainly be a part of it as well, considering all the stuff with the forest. But then, with this interpretation in mind, the man would then be part of what Chris is trying to block out, which, again, makes it seem like he's more directly involved with their trauma than being the therapist who tried to help them. I really don't know. And yeah, at this point, I think we can pretty much rule out Papyrus. I'm sorry, Papyrus. The man shows up on the Poor Children page because one of the kids possibly drew something in art therapy, which he then started imitating to try and cheer them up. This was my best guess at the time, but even I didn't really believe it. We now know he was there because the art therapy room is the Chapter 4 egg room, and the Forgotten Man is, again, somehow related to Chris's trauma and Dessa's disappearance and all that. So, yeah. Des is the person lost in the code / the depths. I still think that this is the case, but rather than it being her actively calling out to us in the present, I think it might just be Dessa's thoughts from when she first disappeared. She does seem to be talking to us when she thanks us for listening, but it could always be a weird, non-linear thing, especially since she mentions how she can't tell how time is moving. That, or it's whatever's left of Des reaching out to us from inside the night or whatever. Alright, now it's time to talk about my sequence of events for Dessa's disappearance. I'm going to break this down bit by bit so I can keep my thoughts organized.
Des, Noelle, Chris, and Azrael all went exploring around the bunker when they were younger. They didn't have to all be there, but at least Des and Chris were. At least those two went inside the bunker, but Noelle and Azrael were likely there as well, either standing outside or just further behind or separated.
I now believe that the four of them originally went exploring in the woods, got lost, and then were lured by Friend to the shelter. Something happened there, but nothing too drastic. Enough to spook everyone, but no one got hurt. The others put it out of their mind, but Des became obsessed with figuring out what was going on and started to mentally spiral, kind of like the Secret Bosses. She became extremely paranoid, isolating herself from others and stashing the rations and survival tools that we find in her room. Eventually, for whatever reason, Des decides to go back to the shelter and has Chris come along. Or maybe Chris saw her leaving and wanted to tag along. Either way, Des and Chris were together.
Somehow, Des disappeared while Chris was with her. I have two ideas as to how exactly this played out. Either Chris turned their back and suddenly Des was just gone with no explanation, or Des got into some kind of trouble, yelling for help or something, and Chris, being a scared little kid, ran away instead of helping her, maybe to try and get the others.
This part is basically the same as before, but I definitely don't think it was as simple as her just vanishing anymore. It's been made clear just how deeply traumatized Chris was by this event, so however it went down, it was disturbing enough to scar Chris forever. Considering the Knight's form, I even think it's possible that Des got killed or something, or that it appeared as if she got killed at least.
Regardless of what specifically happened, I believe Chris was the one who was with Des at the time, leading to them developing a fear of the Dark Worlds, which the bunker would presumably be, and, possibly, a personal sense of guilt from not being able to save her.
This is truer than ever before now. Chris having guilt over Des's disappearance has been emphasized a lot in these new chapters, when before it was just kind of a guess. However, considering a lot of the information we've gotten, it's also possible that Chris had a more direct involvement in Des's disappearance that they feel guilty for. I don't think they literally killed her or anything, but perhaps they were both in danger and Chris chose to leave her behind or sacrifice her to save themselves.
The police, or at least Asgore, searched as hard as they could, but couldn't find her. Frustrated with the lack of results, Mayor Holiday fired Asgore.
I still definitely think Asgore was part of the investigation into Dessa's disappearance, but he was likely a bit more personally involved since we know that he's currently trying to prove that he just wanted to protect everyone. I'm not sure exactly what he did, but it was definitely more than just failing to find Des, I think. That being said, I don't think that he killed her or anything either. I also think it's possible that Carol fired Asgore specifically so that he can continue the investigation privately under her, which is why he's under her thumb the way he is now.
This led to the Holidays and the Dreamers growing further apart. This may have also led to Asgore and Toriel's divorce in some way, whether it just be the general stress, or Asgore failing to find another job. This isn't a necessary part of the equation though, that part could have been unrelated.
Still think that this is true. There were likely more factors to the divorce though, primary of which being Asgore's actions regarding Dessa's disappearance and his obsession with continuing to look into it.
I don't think that Noelle blames Chris for Dessa's disappearance, or holds any actual frustration at them, but it did likely contribute to them growing further apart. They did continue to be friends after this though, as this all happened when they were very young.
Yep, I still stand by this.
I don't know when exactly Noelle would have started her search, whether it was from the beginning or when she was a little older, but at some point, as we all know, she started to search for information about Des online, and she also lost the spelling bee one year when the word December was given.
I still don't know for sure, but it probably was closer to the beginning. It's less of a dedicated search like Asgore and Carol, and more so just her searching Dessa's name every so often and consistently checking her spam folders just in case.
There is the question of how much Noelle actually knows about what happened to Des, considering that she does have a habit of repressing memories. To me, the most likely option is that she really does not know. I think, for whatever reason, Des and Chris went into the bunker, just the two of them, so Noelle didn't witness it firsthand. And considering that it involved spooky supernatural shit and Chris was just a kid, I doubt that even they really knew what happened outside of her just disappearing. I would then imagine that Noelle would know that Dessa's disappearance had something to do with the bunker, but if the police and you yourself can't find anything, and you live in a world presumably without magic, then the only other option you can really consider is that Des left the bunker somehow, and thus Noelle searches for her in the way we know her to do. However, there is a strange inconsistency with this idea, which I only realized after it was pointed out in the Device Theory Part 3, and that's this line from Noelle. She says that they never found anything interesting in the forest behind the graveyard, which doesn't really line up with the bunker's existence, now does it? I would say that while I would otherwise presume that Noelle genuinely has no idea what happened to Des, the fact that she seems to not recall the bunker's existence at all does tell me that maybe she was in fact there and simply repressed the memory. Or, as Molly Star suggests, perhaps the first time around, all four of them went there, and they saw something that scared Noelle so bad that not only did Des go back to try and get to the bottom of it, either on her own or just with Chris, but Noelle repressed the memory of the bunker altogether. This does also read as strange to me, though, since Chris likely told everyone that Des disappeared within the bunker, and that's why the other kids talk about Chris saying something about the bunker. Considering it's a known part of the town, I'm sort of dubious on the idea that Noelle could have just straight up ignored its existence for so long, or even that Chris wouldn't have told Noelle specifically what happened. I don't know, this specific part of the story is really confusing if you think about it for too long, so my best guess is that Noelle was just talking about a different part of the woods. I don't know.
This part is still really weird. I still think it's possible that Noelle could have just repressed her memories of the shelter altogether, but I still find it odd that Chris wouldn't say anything about that. I just can't believe that Noelle was talking about a different part of the woods, but I still don't know how to make this part make complete sense.
When it comes to Chris, I think they were haunted by this event ever since, leading to a lot of their apparent depression and angst in the present. I believe the instances of Chris suddenly getting very still and going to play the piano that Noelle describes in her blog post is Chris having flashbacks of what happened at the bunker. As they got older and were able to process more of this event, I believe it contributed to their depression, as well as feelings of self-hatred, believing that they aren't living their life the way they should be.
Even more emphasis on this fact now. Like I mentioned before, a lot of stuff, but especially the Chapter 4 Egg Room, has made clear just how much this event traumatized Chris. And yeah, I still think that them suddenly playing the piano was their way of dealing with flashbacks. I firmly believe Des is still alive in some form, whether that's trapped in the code or in the depths with Gaster, though those are likely the same thing. However, she could be dead on a sort of metaphorical level. Well, yes, Des is definitely still alive in some form. That form being the Roaring Night. I still think it's up in the air just exactly what state she's in right now. The Night could simply be a corrupted version of her, or the Night is merely being created from her in some way. I don't think Des herself is still trapped in the depths, but that's probably where she was before she became the Night. Goners might just be dead people, and the concept of them being forgotten just describes what happens when you're dead. I still think this is possible. We haven't really gotten any more of evidence for or against it, so we still have really no way of knowing. Des could likely be considered a goner too. Maybe with the power of Noelle's memories of her, we'll be able to rescue her and bring her back to life. I definitely think Des runs with the same crowd as the goners, even if she isn't literally one herself. And yeah, I still think Noelle's memories of her could be the key to rescuing her in some form. Noelle will be the key in finding Des since she's lost in the code, and Noelle is the one with the knack for breaking games. Her abilities are explored at length on her blog, which seems strange if it's only relevant in the weird route. I still think Noelle will obviously be involved with finding Des, but I don't know if she'll be the main key to doing it anymore since Des is the Knight rather than simply lost in the code, which isn't as directly tied to Noelle's game-breaking abilities. I still think those abilities will be relevant though on both routes in some form. We'll find Des on the main route, at least one where we're finding all the secrets, but we won't on the weird route, or at least it will go down differently. I do still think we might not find Des on the weird route, since not only is Noelle now under our control in the light world, but we're also getting to see less of Chris's plan with everyone, whose goal is likely bringing Des back, which means that maybe it won't become as relevant on this route. Gaster trying to trick us into rescuing him from the depths using Des is unlikely but interesting. I'm even less convinced of this now, but again, I still find it an interesting idea. Des disappearing probably wasn't an intentional move on Gaster's part. It was likely just a genuine accident caused by the kids messing with stuff they shouldn't have. I still think that this is the case. I doubt Gaster intentionally wanted to nab Des, though if he made friend and they're the one who lured the kids to the shelter, then maybe it was an intentional move. I honestly really don't know. The amount of time that How to Draw Dragons has been overdue possibly corresponds to the amount of time since Des's disappearance. The only piece of additional info we got about this is the badly traced drawing of a dragon in Des's room, which does tie the book to her specifically, so this actually seems even more plausible. I'm still inclined to believe this is the case until proven otherwise. I think Lost Where the Forest Would Grow is referring to Des and her disappearing in the bunker. Well, technically it's related more to the kids following Friend in the woods, but that's still definitely related to Des's disappearance, so I'm still counting this. The Poor Children page is in reference to Chris, Noelle, and possibly Azriel going to therapy after Des's disappearance, likely art therapy specifically. Sort of, we don't know if the others went to art therapy too, but we know that Chris did at least, and it almost certainly has to do with Des's disappearance, so basically, yeah. I think Rudy will die, but I could also see him not dying since it's kind of expected from the moment you meet him. I'm still unsure. He's at least doing better than a lot of us thought, considering he was actually able to go to church and walk around and stuff, so maybe he won't end up dying after all. It's definitely still possible, though. I don't think Rudy personally will have much significance to the story, outside of his death potentially causing Noelle to make her own Dark World. Still think this is true. Sorry, Rudy. Sans is a Lightner from Deltarune. This is basically just confirmed at this point, considering the place where it rained and everything. I honestly don't know how you can deny it at this point. Papyrus not knowing what the sun is likely just a joke, since he mentions it elsewhere. And even if it's not, it could be explained by him being too young to remember, especially since the way he talks about the green grass in the Q&A makes it seem like he can't remember much of the specifics, and we don't know anything about him in Deltarune. I still stand by all of this. Gaster is probably Sans and Papyrus's dad or grandpa, but I don't know how that fits into everything overall. This is basically still where I'm at. I don't know. I assume that when Undertale Gaster got shattered, all instances of him were shattered as well, so a version of Gaster could have existed in the light world, been Sans and Papyrus's relative, and then disappeared when Undertale Gaster got shattered. This ties back into the idea of Deltarune Gaster being the Forgotten Man, but again, I really don't know. Sans and Papyrus's origins won't be that relevant to the main plot, but rather more of a background plot point that you have to figure out by putting the pieces together yourself. Perhaps some major event like the Roaring will happen, and it will be implied that they managed to go to another world. I still think that this is the case. Sans is a little more directly involved now, considering he's part of a mandatory cutscene, and I do think he'll have relevance. I just don't think that here Papyrus will be given the same amount of focus and attention that the main cast has been given. Chapter 3 will focus on Toriel and Chris's relationship and the Dreamer family as a whole. Sort of. Chapter 3 definitely revolves around the Dreamer family, but there isn't much emphasis put on specifically Toriel and Chris's relationship. They don't even interact throughout the entire chapter. It's unclear if Ralsei will know that Chris made the TV Dark Fountain or if he'll find out later, or maybe everyone won't find out at all. Well, we got 2 more chapters and we still don't actually know this for certain, but considering Chris's fountain is a part of the prophecy, then Ralsei probably did know it was them the whole time. He probably knew even before Chris made it. I believe Friend is Mike, and likely a lucky cat related to the concepts of RNG. I also believe he's the one who wrote the Mystery Valentine. I've been going back and forth on it, but I still think the real Mike is probably Friend, due to the existing connections between it and Spamton and everything. But Friend is at the very least definitely a cat related to the concept of RNG, inspired by Lucky Cats.
Editing in Zero here again. I want to say that at this point, I definitely fully believe that Friend is Mike, and also the latest newsletter, we got the little scene with the Mikes and Tenna, and Tenna has, this dialogue about, he thinks he's talking to the real Mike, and he says oh, I know you cared about Spamton too, and you told me not to, that, he couldn't share his secret with me, but I did it anyway. They're very much emphasizing the fact that Mike is a real guy, which I feel like at this point we all agree on that Mike isn't just a joke, but it's really being emphasized there that Mike is in fact a real person, and I feel like it just makes the most sense that it's Friend. All the pre-existing connections, I'm very confident in that fact.
As for the Mystery Valentine, it's basically confirmed at this point that it was in fact the Forgotten Man, which was my other guess anyway. Also, Friend is so much more prominent and evil, than I was ever expecting, and I am very happy about it. Future secret bosses will connect to the pre-established pattern of being discarded and relating to themes of freedom and control. They sort of do. If the knight is Des, then she has sort of been discarded in the sense that she disappeared, and same thing with Gerson being dead, but that's kind of a stretch. The secret bosses definitely don't follow the exact pattern of an item that has been discarded like we thought they would. As for the themes of freedom, that does still seem to be true. Gerson is all about freedom in the context of fate. The knight doesn't really seem to have a direct connection to freedom, but the quest to get the Shadow Mantle is all about freedom, and now we've learned that the quest to get all the Shadow Crystals is also a quest directly for freedom. So yeah, the theme of freedom when it comes to the secret bosses is alive and well. Future secret bosses will likely have some kind of visual resemblance to Gaster, just like Jevil and Spamton. Kinda. The knight definitely resembles Gaster with the same black and white color scheme and, again, the holes in the hands, but Gerson doesn't really. Gerson does have a lot of thematic similarities to Gaster, so even if it's not visually, I think the general idea of the secret bosses all being related to Gaster in some way is still true. Woody theory probably isn't real, but I really want it to be, and it makes way more sense than it should. I'm kind of legitimately convinced it's real. It didn't end up being real in Chapter 3, but I'm honestly genuinely convinced it will be real in some form in Chapter 5. Literally everything is lining up perfectly. The cancelled cowboy puppet show that Asgore liked, Asgore having a TV in his shop, the Flower King Darkworld getting called the Field of Pink and Gold, etc. Somehow, despite being killed in Chapter 3, Woody theory has only risen from the ashes stronger than ever. I don't like the discarded flowers idea because I don't think Toby would make another flower boss that so closely evokes Flowey, and even if he did, it'd make more sense for a potential Flower King Darkworld. So considering that we are getting that Flower King Darkworld, this concept is still relevant. I still don't really like the idea personally, but I will say I was a little unfair in that original video. I was too presumptuous in saying that a boss inspired by Flowey would have to be too close to Flowey, especially considering that we literally have Spamton Neo who is directly inspired by Mettaton while still feeling unique and like his own person outside of Mettaton. So I think that if we do get some kind of character inspired by Flowey in the Flower King Darkworld, it'll be along those lines. I believe the "no one will shed a tear for him" comment is referring to the Chapter 3 secret boss, not Birdly. Yup, well, it's sort of. It was referring to Ram, who isn't actually the secret boss, but is, related. But yeah, definitely not Birdly. I believe both the Jockington Grows the Beer screenshot and the sprite of the tree from the Lost Where the Forest Would Grow page are part of some kind of fortune-telling room that shows predictions for the future. I was basically right. I didn't predict that it would be literally the prophecy, but I was right in that it was foretelling the future. A Town Hall Dark World is technically possible, but not likely, since it doesn't fit with the escapism theme. Yeah, I still don't think the Town Hall will be a Dark World, but, it's possible. A Hospital Dark World is possible, but doesn't fit with the escapism theme. It's possible a video game-themed Dark World incorporating Noelle's memories could take place here if she brings her games over there, but again, that's a lot less likely. My thoughts mostly haven't changed, I just think it's even more unlikely now. Icy's Pizza and QC's Diner are both possible Dark World locations, and they could focus on nostalgia as escapism. Icy's seems more likely due to the weird emphasis on Icy, the diner being more tied to the Dreamers, which we're already covering in Chapter 3, and the fact that it's something tied to Chris and Noelle's childhood. I still think these are technically possible, but honestly at this point I don't think we're getting them. Neither feels right for a Chapter 6 or 7 Dark World in my opinion. Noelle's house seems like a likely location for a Dark World, maybe made by Noelle after Rudy dies. I think it focused on video games, but specifically Noelle's memories of them mixed in with her glitches and creepypasta stuff. This seems like the most likeliest place to encounter the Ice Palace. There could be an area, or even the entire Dark World could be based around Dragon Blazers, and we could even see other games like Cat Petters. Turns out we actually got both Dragon Blazers and Cat Petters in Chapter 3. We even got the goddamn Ice Palace! So, while I still think that this Dark World is possible, and it feels more likely to me than other choices, it'd probably have to go with either a different theme, or just feature different video games of Noelle's that we didn't already see. The festival is another likely location for a Dark World, probably during the Roaring as a town-wide dark fountain. Amusement park rides would fall into the category of entertainment and escapism. Unclear on this one, honestly. We're getting the Flower King Dark World during the festival, so I'm less sure that the Roaring will take place then. There's still multiple ways that could happen, though. The Roaring could start while we're inside the Flower King Dark World, that or the festival lasts multiple days and it happens another day, or it only lasts one day but happens over the course of multiple chapters. Again, we'll just have to see. The Roaring seems suspicious. There's a lot of weirdness surrounding it, and it feels out of place for the Titans to be the big final boss as just generic big monsters rather than someone like Gaster. Well, I was right about the Titans feeling too generic to be the final boss. Considering we beat one in Chapter 4, I highly doubt they'll be the final boss. We'll probably fight at least one more in the future, maybe multiple at the same time, so it's more difficult, but they're definitely not going to be the final boss at this point. I feel very validated. Concerning the Roaring itself, it does seem like it's real after all, considering, well, the literal Titan we fought that spawned from multiple fountains being created. But my suspicion about the prophecy was totally validated, so it came from the right place, even if this specific thing ended up not being accurate. The Knight clearly doesn't want to start the Roaring despite their title, since they could have done it easily by now. They even make the Chapter 1 Dark World right next to the Grand Fountain where the heroes begin their journey. Despite us having seen the Knight now, this is even more apparent. Not only do they not start the Roaring, but every time we see them, they're just kind of standing around aura farming and not actually doing anything, so it seems pretty clear that the Knight and its associates are not trying to cause the Roaring, or at the very least that isn't their main goal. The bunker will 100% be a future Dark World, likely the last one. I still absolutely believe this, especially considering that the main goal right now is to try to get into the shelter. Submarine Castletown theory by Bricks VGM makes a lot of sense. I'm not fully convinced that Castletown being safe from the Roaring and us recruiting all the Darkners to protect them is what's going on, but we'll have to see. I still believe in this theory in terms of Castletown being within the depths like a submarine, but the other part I feel like is less likely now since we know that Ralsei is #1, "Us Darkners don't matter and you should forget about us" Doom poster. I don't know if he'd care that much about protecting his fellow Darkners, but it's still possible. The Grand Fountain has existed for a long time, just not in this state. It may have come from the grander Sea of Darkness and only recently breached into the supply closet somehow. I still agree with this until proven otherwise. The Grand Fountain was either made by Gaster himself or the Knight working under him. I definitely don't think the Knight made the Grand Fountain anymore. Honestly, at this point, I don't think anyone made it. I think it was just something that has always existed within this world. Darkners are based not just on the objects themselves, but the connotations surrounding them. Guilty Flygon theorizes these connotations come from the Knights and any others present at the time of the Fountain's creation, but I think a simpler explanation is that it just comes from the people who use the items. I still stand by this. Now that we know the night is Des, these connotations coming from her works too, especially since that we know she influences the Dark World somewhat, like the baseball moon in Chapter 2, but I'm still more inclined to believe that it's taken just from users of the object in general. I like Guilty Flygon's theory that the roaring would be like reverse Plato's allegory of the cave. With only darkness, whatever you can imagine in the dark becomes your reality. I still really like this idea. It feels even more relevant now, considering Ralsei's monologue at the beginning of Chapter 3 explaining Dark Worlds, which already sounds pretty similar to this. The Dark Worlds are connected to water because the ocean is a mysterious place that has multiple layers which get progressively darker and darker. My thoughts on this haven't changed, I still think this is why. The old song from the sea is coming from Des in the depths, likely Lost Girl. I still think this, and I'm even more sure it's Lost Girl, considering that it's now shown up in both Raise Up Your Bat and Black Knife, songs that are both heavily associated with Des. Sham's line, "You don't want to get caught when the sun goes down," might simply refer to Lightners not being able to leave the Dark World at night. It could also potentially refer to Darkners getting more aggressive. Well, we still don't know what the hell they meant by this, but we do know it's not being unable to leave at night at least, since we leave the TV world at night. I still really don't know what this could be hinting at, but I definitely think we'll find out eventually. There will be actual interactions of some kind between us and Chris in the future. The conflict between us will definitely become more prominent and more severe as time goes on, but I think we'll be able to resolve it in the end. Yep, things have been going as I expected. I mean, I didn't expect things to become so over this early, but still, as I predicted, it's gotten more and more obvious each chapter, so all this still holds true. In the future, maybe we'll be able to talk directly to Chris via the dialogue options. I'm still holding out for this, it would be so cool. The player is 100% the angel, though we're likely not the literal angel the Lightners worship. Absolutely. It's still not 100% confirmed, but there's even more evidence for it, like us hiding under the angel doll and the angel prophecy panel, and I feel like now it's become the general consensus as opposed to before when it was more split. As a vehement angel player believer, I feel very happy. Noelle's connections to the angel make her like Jesus, where we as the angel speak through her. I still think this. There's also the aspect of us as the angel representing control, so Noelle being the angel with the tattered wings is a way of saying that she wants control and freedom, but isn't able to attain it. The soul color will probably change more in the future, but I'm not entirely sure. I think that it's an act of divine intervention on Gaster's part, giving us an advantage so that we're able to proceed and the story can move forward. No matter what happens with the soul colors in the future, I think they'll abide by this same idea. Well, yes, it did in fact change again, and this time it definitely wasn't an act of divine intervention, so I was wrong about that. I still think that might have been the case with Spamton Neo, though, since I really can't think of a better explanation that doesn't rely on direct connections to Undertale. I'm neutral on Mayor Knight. It's interesting and doesn't seem to have much counter-evidence. Mayor Knight stocks have gone up, so hey, there's that, but no, it's not her. It's possible that there's multiple Knights. I mean, there kind of are, just not really in the way people theorized. Chris Knight shouldn't be written off, but I highly doubt it's them. Not because of specific inconsistencies, but because them being the one behind everything would completely undermine their role in the story as someone who's not in control. I think they're meant to be a red herring. Well, Chris Knight did end up being wrong, but basically everything about it was right except for the part where Chris is the Knight. It was definitely meant to be a red herring. My concerns about it undermining their role in the story have been soothed because even though Chris does have a lot more agency than we initially assumed, they're still carrying out this plan in service of someone else, likely not entirely of their own volition. They may actively choose to go along with it, but they're definitely being blackmailed or otherwise manipulated in some way. Chris's role in the story overall is still someone lacking freedom. In fact, it's even worse now because now we know that even when they rip us out, they're still unable to be truly free. Oblivion Theory. The vessel's role is similar to Kara, representing the same concept of the addictiveness of numbers going up and stuff, our true character. The vessel goes around creating infinite worlds/games for us to consume, which is why the night doesn't just cause the roaring, and why the dark worlds seem to be made specifically for us. The vessel is the embodiment of a dream, our dream to play the game. So, Vessel Knight is dead. Rest in peace, sweet prince. Des is absolutely the Knight, and if it's not her, then it's Carol. The conclusions about the vessel being the Knight and Gaster's main motivations may have turned out inaccurate, but I still think Oblivion Theory contains a lot of really good analysis and observations. I definitely still think that the parallels between the vessel and Kara are intentional, though what significance that will have now is unknown. Egg in Wingdings is the movement of a knight in chess. This isn't really a prediction since I had no explanation for it in the original video, but I wanted to bring it up again here anyway. I still don't know what's up with this, but now that we know that the Forgotten Man is somehow related to Des' disappearance due to the 1225 Easter egg allowing you to get to the Chapter 3 egg room, it makes a little more sense, but we still really don't know why. Birdley is dead in the Weird Root. Even if he's just in a coma, I don't think he's coming back. Well, turns out he actually is in a coma after all. Still remains to be seen if he'll actually be able to come back though. My guess is if you abort the root in Noelle's room, then he'll eventually recover. If you continue and lock yourself onto the Weird Root, he'll end up flatlining. Susie and Noelle likely kissed in Noelle's room, but that probably isn't a good basis to start their relationship on since Noelle wasn't well. My thoughts on this haven't really changed at all. The romantic undertones between Chris and Noelle aren't just a small aspect of the Weird Root, but what it's built around. Yep, this is even more apparent in Chapter 4. The Weird Root is us breaking the limits of the game in order to have our choices actually matter and change the story in a meaningful way. This has basically been confirmed now. Rosé says on the Weird Root that a path other than the prophecy might be even worse, which indirectly confirms that the point of the root is to try and break away from the prophecy by any means necessary, even if that means doing terrible things. Our possession of Chris coming out might happen a lot sooner on the Weird Root. Sort of. The scene in Noelle's room is the most overt things have gotten with us being a separate being, but Noelle still addresses us as Chris, so it doesn't seem like she's identified us as entirely separate. And now that she's fully under our control, it's unclear when our existence will actually come out. I still think it'll probably happen sooner on the Weird Root, but Susie will probably have to figure it out herself at this point. Rosé is a bystander on the Weird Root. He was definitely not expecting this to happen and knows something has gone wrong, and he's almost certainly disturbed by our actions, but because he's subservient to us, he just stays silent and lets us do what we want. All this is true, but in Chapter 3 on a Weird Root, if you say you're taking Noelle to the festival, Rosé does flat out say that he thinks that it's a bad choice and looks concerned. So that's pretty much confirmation that yes, Rosé is aware of what we're doing to some degree and does not like it, but is kind of just letting us do it, but this moment indicates that he's starting to stand up to us. It's a small thing, but a huge improvement for Rosé, who usually doesn't let himself judge our actions, so maybe he will actually end up trying to stop us alongside Susie. Susie will not let us do whatever we want. Perhaps we'll split away from Rosé on the main route, while we'll split away from Susie on the Weird Route. Susie is going to kill us. But anyways, for the splitting thing, I really don't think this anymore. I think we'll all stick together on the main route for the most part, and then both Susie and Rosé will turn on us in the Weird Route. In both routes, we're not going to follow the prophecy exactly, but the difference is that in the main route, Chris is the one breaking away from that path, while we're the one doing it in the Weird Route. I was sort of right. We're definitely not following the prophecy in either route, and we as the player are the one initiating the Weird Route to break away, but as I mentioned before, it's unclear what Chris's exact stance on the prophecy is. They definitely seem to also want to change it at least somewhat. The real question is whether the plan they're helping carry out is for or against it. The how long did it take her to smile question is asking how long it took for Noelle to smile again after Des disappeared. While that's still technically possible, I don't think that's it. I was skeptical of people saying that it's about Noelle and the Weird Route, but turns out that's exactly it most likely. Considering the thank you page and red dot and everything, it's most likely about how long it took for Noelle to start smiling after our abuse of her, how long it took for her to get fully lost in the trance. I was going to have a point about the whole applicable, non-applicable thing with the numbers and everything, but to be honest, I still really don't know exactly what that meant, and I don't like thinking about it because it makes my head hurt. Maybe I'll try to figure it out someday, but that day is not today, so let's just move on. There's almost certainly only 7 chapters, and the other logos in the code are just tests. But what if they're for a climax where Gaster tries to get us to keep playing forever by showing us glimpses of future chapters we could have? My thoughts haven't really changed on this, other than me thinking it's even less likely. Chapter 0 may exist as a short, perhaps even non-playable flashback chapter, showing the events of the night of Des' disappearance. I still think this. We are given the illusion of choice in the Dark Worlds, but our choices still don't actually matter at the end of the day. This is likely done by Gaster, making us think we can change things when in reality we're still doing exactly what he wants. I still think the Dark Worlds are illusion of choice, but I don't think it really has to do with Gaster. The view I had of Gaster as someone who wants us to do exactly as he says and have our choices not matter doesn't really align with the likely idea at this point that he really is trying to change the prophecy one way or another. The second voice in the Goner Maker is the vessel. Gaster had us imbue it with our will so it could act as the knight. Then he orchestrates a scene of him getting interrupted so that we don't suspect him. Nope. It's still possible the interruption was planned and done by someone working with Gaster, but I no longer believe it's the vessel. At this point, I think it's either Des or most likely Chris themselves, which would also explain the similarities to Kara's speech patterns, since Chris shares many traits with Kara. The ending will be technically the same no matter what, but the events leading up to it will recontextualize it. Well, it turns out that the whole one ending thing was less an actual statement from Toby and more so foreshadowing for an actual in-game plot point, so honestly, we really don't know anymore, but I still think this is a strong possibility. The ending will involve us getting disconnected from Deltarune's world. In the main route, we will work together with the characters to do this, but in the weird route, the characters will fight against us to do this. I still think this is true. There is definitely some significance to the save files being slightly different and Gaster's comment about preparations being complete, but I don't really know what it is. I remember seeing someone say that the preparations are complete line is probably just Gaster commenting on the fact that we're creating multiple backups, not necessarily an indication that we'll actually need them for something. I think this is the most likely explanation until proven otherwise. Toby's comment about there being no plans to require the player to complete multiple different save files still leaves room for us potentially having to do things across save files for the true secret Gaster ending or whatever. I still think there's ambiguity there, but we honestly might just not have to do anything like that at all. Only time will tell. Nightmare Night will definitely be repurposed for Deltarune, likely for an endgame track. Well, looky there, Nightmare Night appears as like the main melody of Black Knife, aka the Knight's theme. Who could have guessed? But anyways, yes, I still think we could get a full Nightmare Night track in the future, likely also a night-related track because, well, duh. I no longer believe Penumbra Phantasm will appear in Deltarune, but I still think it's possible something similar or utilizing elements of it could appear, since the leitmotif does 100% appear in certain Deltarune songs. Perhaps the original song has evolved over the years and become different enough that Toby classifies it as a completely different song. My thoughts on Penumbra haven't changed. The leitmotif is 100% there, so however unlikely, I think that at the very least some elements of it will continue appearing even if we never get the full song. One of the major themes of the game is escapism. The way the characters interact with fiction, the Dark Worlds, parallels how we interact with fiction, their world. The characters are starting to believe the Dark Worlds are better than their actual reality, so perhaps at some point both they and the player will have to take a step back. Yep, all still true. Though I think one thing I didn't bring up here that I should have, and that is especially more prominent now, is the theme of freedom and choice and all that. With all the prophecy stuff, it's really starting to come to a head now and is incredibly important. I really should have mentioned it in the first video, I just forgot. I agree with device theory and the idea that our suspension of disbelief will be diegetic within the game. I haven't rewatched the whole thing yet with the new chapters in mind, but I think the majority of it still holds up. And yeah, I still think suspension of disbelief is in some way diegetic, even if it's not an overt part of the narrative. Another major theme is nostalgia, which ties in with escapism. Yep, and if the Night Gang really is working to bring back Des, then that would tie in with this. Their goal is literally trying everything in their power to make things go back to how they were in the past. Gaster, Ralsei, and the narrative itself are not reliable narrators. The story itself is trying to mislead you. The specifics of that are unclear, but the general idea I was trying to get across is still true. We're presented with this fun, typical RPG adventure playing as prophesized heroes, but after being lulled in with that premise, it's subverted, and it turns out that the prophecy isn't a good thing, and that we're gonna have to try and work against it. That's really the main thing I was trying to get across there. And that's basically it. There were probably a few more things I could have mentioned, but that's the majority of what I covered in that original video. I hope you enjoyed hearing my updated thoughts and everything I talked about. Let me know your opinions on everything I covered. I think overall, while there was plenty I was wrong about, my general view of the game, its themes, and its characters hasn't changed much, and in fact has been validated a lot by these new chapters. Even though things are a lot more complicated now, and we've all been thrown for a bit of a loop, I find that kind of exciting. If we were right about everything, there wouldn't be much to talk about, would there? Anyways, that's it for now. I'll see you next time.